My world collapsed when I found out about my wife's affair. All her work dinners turned out to be something entirely different. For months, I had brushed off the late nights, the hurried explanations, and the faint scent of cologne that wasn't mine. I told myself I was being paranoid, that she was working hard to secure her promotion. I wanted to trust her. I needed to trust her. One evening, as she left for yet another work dinner, I decided to surprise her. I had bought her favorite flowers and planned to join her and her colleagues, imagining her delighted smile when she saw me. But as I walked into the upscale restaurant she had mentioned, my stomach knotted. There she was, laughing in a way I hadn't seen in years, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a man I didn't recognize. I froze. I wanted to believe it was innocent, but the way she leaned toward him, the intimate way they spoke, told a different story. My heart raced as I snapped a photo, needing proof of the part of me still in denial. I left without confronting her, too overwhelmed to process what I had seen. That night, I waited for her to come home. She smelled of wine and whispered a quick apology for being late before heading to bed. The guilt on her face was fleeting, masked by exhaustion or perhaps pretense. I couldn't bring myself to ask her outright. Not yet. The next day, I couldn't stay silent. When I showed her the photo, her face drained of color. She tried to deny it at first, stumbling over her words, but when I pressed, she broke down. Her work dinners were with him, a co-worker she had grown close to during late nights at the office. She said it hadn't meant to happen, that she hadn't realized how distant we had become. Her tears fell freely as she begged for forgiveness, promising to end it. But I couldn't hear her over the sound of my own heart shattering. In the weeks that followed, I tried to understand, to make sense of the betrayal. But the trust we had built over years was gone, replaced by a chasm of doubt and pain. Every glance, every touch, felt tainted. The life we had built together seemed like a lie, and I couldn't see a way forward. The love I once felt for her was buried beneath anger and sorrow. I had always thought we could face anything together, but this was different. It wasn't something I could forgive or forget. Eventually, I realized that staying would only prolong the pain. So, with a heavy heart, I packed my things and walked away from the life we had shared. The world I had known was gone, but maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild a new one for myself. The days after I left were a blur of loneliness and confusion. Every corner of my life seemed haunted by memories of her. Our laughter, our fights, the quiet moments when we simply existed together. I missed the life we had, or at least the illusion of it. But every time I thought about returning, the image of her with him, her laughter reserved for someone else, burned in my mind. Friends and family reached out, offering their sympathy, but no words could fill the void she had left. I tried to bury myself in work, hoping that the busyness would distract me, but even that felt hollow. Nights were the worst. Lying in bed alone, I replayed every moment leading up to the discovery, questioning how I had missed the signs. Was it me? Had I driven her away? Or had she simply chosen a path that excluded me? A month after I left, she reached out. Her voice trembled as she asked if we could talk. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe, the same place where we had shared countless happy moments in the past. Seeing her was like reopening a wound that had barely started to heal. She looked tired, her usual confidence replaced by a vulnerability I had never seen before. She apologized, truly apologized, not just for the affair, but for the way she had neglected our marriage. She said she had ended things with him, that she realized too late how much she had hurt me. Her words were heartfelt, and for a moment, I saw a glimmer of the woman I had fallen in love with. But I couldn't ignore the weight of what had happened. I appreciate your apology, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. But some things can't be undone. I need time. Time to figure out who I am without us. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't argue. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control over my life. I wasn't ready to forgive her, and I didn't know if I ever would. But I knew I had to focus on myself, to rebuild the pieces of my shattered world. In the months that followed, I sought therapy, something I had always brushed off as unnecessary. It helped me unpack the pain, the betrayal, and even the parts of our marriage where I had fallen short. I started reconnecting with old friends, trying new hobbies, and slowly reclaiming the pieces of myself that had been lost in the relationship. There were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable. But there were also moments of light, tiny victories that reminded me life could go on. A hike to a breathtaking viewpoint, a conversation with a stranger that left me smiling, or the first time I laughed without feeling guilty. Eventually, I stopped checking her social media, stopped replaying our last conversation in my mind. She became a chapter in my story, an important one, but not the whole book. Looking back, I realized the affair had forced me to confront truths about myself and my life that I had been avoiding. It wasn't the ending I had wanted, but it was the one that set me on a path to rediscovering who I was. And as painful as it had been, it reminded me of something I had forgotten. Even when your world collapses, you have the power to rebuild. Brick by brick, moment by moment, I was crafting a new life, one that was entirely my own. As the seasons changed, so did I. Life didn't just move forward. It began to bloom in ways I hadn't expected. I found solace in things I had once overlooked. The quiet of early mornings, the smell of rain, the laughter of strangers in a coffee shop. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but a slow, deliberate process of healing and rediscovery. One of the most surprising parts of that journey was how much I learned about myself. I realized that in the years of our marriage, I had lost touch with my own dreams and desires. So, I started making changes, not grand, sweeping ones, but small, meaningful steps toward a life that felt like mine. I joined a local hiking group, rediscovering my love for the outdoors. There was something liberating about standing at the top of a mountain, the wind in my face, knowing I had climbed there on my own. It was a metaphor I realized for my entire journey. Each step forward was hard, but the view was worth it. I also began taking a creative writing class at the community center, something I had always wanted to try but never made time for. Putting my thoughts into words was cathartic, and sharing them with others helped me feel less alone. I even wrote about the affair, not as a way to dwell on the past, but to process it, to understand it, and to let it go. One evening after class, a woman approached me. Her name was Claire, and she had shared a story about losing her mother that had moved me to tears. We started talking, and soon those conversations extended beyond class. Claire was kind, thoughtful, and refreshingly honest. She didn't push me to share more than I was ready to, but she listened intently when I did. For the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope. Not necessarily for a new relationship, but for the possibility of connection. Claire became a friend, and in her, I found a reminder that not all relationships are fraught with betrayal. Some are built on mutual respect and understanding. As time passed, my ex-wife and I crossed paths occasionally. The first few encounters were awkward, filled with unspoken words and lingering hurt. But over time, those meetings grew less painful. I no longer felt the sharp sting of betrayal when I saw her. Instead, I felt a quiet acceptance. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. One day, she sent me a letter. In it, she thanked me for the years we had shared and for the grace I had shown, even when she didn't deserve it. She told me she was working on herself, that she was learning from her mistakes. I didn't respond, but I appreciated her words. They felt like a closing chapter, a final note in a story that had already ended. Now, when I think about that time in my life, it no longer feels like the collapse of my world. It feels like the beginning of something new, a chance to rebuild with intention and purpose. I don't know what the future holds, but I've learned that I'm strong enough to face it. The pain didn't break me. It shaped me. And for that, I'm grateful. Months turned into years, and the life I rebuilt slowly started to feel less like a patchwork of survival and more like a life worth celebrating. My days were filled with meaningful pursuits, hiking trails I'd never explored, volunteering at a local youth program, and pouring my thoughts into the pages of a journal. I wasn't just living. I was thriving in ways I hadn't thought possible. Claire remained a constant presence through it all. Our friendship grew deeper, and somewhere along the way, the lines began to blur. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but a steady, natural progression built on mutual trust and understanding. She knew my past, and I knew hers, and together we embraced the imperfections that made us who we were. One evening, as we walked along the beach, the sun setting in hues of gold and crimson, she asked me a question I hadn't expected. "Do you think you'll ever trust someone fully again?" Her words hung in the air, carried by the sound of the waves. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond, but then I realized the answer had been forming in my heart for some time. "I think trust isn't about never being afraid," I said, turning to look at her. "It's about deciding that the risk is worth it." She smiled, and in that moment, I knew I was ready to take that risk. Not because I was trying to fill a void, but because I had found something worth holding on to again. We took things slowly, both of us cautious yet hopeful. There were moments of hesitation, echoes of past wounds that surfaced unexpectedly, but we faced them together. She didn't try to fix me, and I didn't try to fix her. Instead, we offered each other the space to heal and grow at our own pace. Eventually, Claire encouraged me to publish some of the writing I'd been working on. Reluctantly, I submitted a short essay about my journey to a local magazine. To my surprise, they not only accepted it but featured it prominently, titling it *Rebuilding a Life from the Ashes*. The response was overwhelming. Emails poured in from strangers who shared their own stories of heartbreak and resilience. Many said my words had helped them feel less alone, that they had found a sense of hope in my story. For the first time, I realized my pain had a purpose. It could inspire and connect with others. With Claire's encouragement, I started working on a memoir, weaving together the lessons I had learned about love, loss, and self-discovery. Writing it wasn't easy. I had to confront the darkest parts of myself and my past. But by the time I finished, I felt lighter, as though I had finally closed the door on that chapter of my life. When the memoir was published, it opened doors I never imagined. Invitations to speak at events, interviews with media outlets, and even the chance to lead workshops on resilience and personal growth. Each opportunity felt like a testament to how far I'd come, not just from the affair, but from the version of myself who had once been too afraid to face the truth. Through it all, Claire stood by my side. Her unwavering support reminded me daily that love, when it's true and pure, doesn't demand perfection. It embraces the messiness of life and chooses to stay anyway. Looking back now, I can see that my world didn't collapse when I discovered my wife's affair. It shifted, forcing me to step out of the shadows of complacency and into the light of possibility. The man I am today is stronger, more self-aware, and more compassionate than the man I was then. And as I walk this new path, with Claire's hand in mine and a future full of possibilities, I know one thing for certain. Sometimes, the greatest heartbreaks are the ones that lead us to our truest selves.